Hey y'all, it's Bree.
And Lainey, welcome.
All right, so we are at this day and age right now where we're kind of in the wane of the school year and the early days of summer, and the CDC is releasing guidelines. Lots of states are starting to develop drafts of what school potentially could look like for the fall, and things are all abuzz for sure. I know everywhere it turns, whether it's fake news, real news, whatever it might be, we're starting to see, the light at the end of the tunnel, or maybe it's just a backing up car, our train. I'm not really sure what that looks like yet, but certainly lots of things starting to come through.
Yes. And I know we're going to spend a lot of time on this episode kind of talking about that because I know you and I've talked about there's a lot of like visceral reaction to these recommendations and guidelines. And so let's do our sweet and sour first because that's what we like to start with for our lemonade. And then I think we're gonna unpack this a bit. I think that's probably the best approach. And then this is again part of our back to school series. So we're gonna be with this topic of like what does the fall look like for a while. And I think that day to day changing of we never know what's gonna be the next thing to come. So we're with this for a little while. Okay, so I am going to try very hard not to break down as I share my sour and my sweet and sour for this week. There are some people who watch on IGTV and YouTube, and I don't want them seeing an ugly crier. So I'm going to try to get through my sour pretty quickly. And my sour is that my family does not live close. My parents, my mom is in Hawaii, my dad is in Arizona, my in-laws are in Oklahoma City. I love them all very much, and I miss them. And I don't know when I'm going to get to see them next. And so, again, going to try to not break into the ugly cry. But I'm kind of feeling a second wave of emotion. It's like when everything happened in school closures, that was a lot. And I feel like I'm slowly like accepting that. But this is a second wave for me because I typically see my parents every few months. And I don't know when I'm going to get to see them again. I'm extremely grateful for FaceTime and the technology that we have, but it's not the same. And I'm struggling right now. I'm going to be honest. There were some tears over the weekend, and so I'm kind of processing my sour right now. And I hear your voice in my head saying, "Oh, that's a punch of sour." Like it is. It's a real punch of sour. So.
Oh my It is, but I do think that it is important to honor that right now. Like I think that you're absolutely right. Like you need to pause and grieve that. And I love that you chose that word because that's why we are human beings. Is we are social. We crave that physical contact, that emotional contact. And while technology is certainly is amazing, and we're very very grateful for it, just like you said, grateful for FaceTime, grateful for those video calls. Zoom has been a lifesaver for the classroom for sure. That said, it's not a replacement, and we can't be an all or nothing kind of situation. And so I think that it might be that little band-aid that we have, but at the same time, it's not going to replace it. And we're not going to be happy with this forever. And so how do we, how do we get to a point to where we get to have that social contact? I think that's really, really important.
Yeah. I mean, and I know I mentioned this to you before, it's a little bit exhausting to me to have so much of like thinking cost benefit analysis. Like, do I go to the grocery store? Do I send my kids to camp? Like, these are things that were just so easily taken for granted that I would just do these things. And so things like, how do my kids get to see their grandparents next? This is like a real struggle. And so I appreciate you, honing in on my fact that I am grieving this. And I know we've talked about me grieving this. But I mean, I will say on the positive side, this will be my sweet. I am very fortunate to be sheltering in place with my family, my husband and my two kids. So that's a definite bonus, and I'm so grateful for that. And we are doing our gratitude practices all the time because we are staying positive about the sweet. But I definitely am just going to take some time to grieve that I don't get to see my family, my mom and my dad and my in-laws right now.
Well, and I think that that's really important too for us to keep in mind that being positive doesn't mean that you don't have the negative, right? Like that's such an important thing to keep it at the forefront of our minds whenever we're talking with our kids too. Like happiness doesn't mean the absence of sadness. It means that you acknowledge it, you pause within it, and then you are grateful for the pieces that move forward with it. So I think that that is a good job, Mama, for modeling that as well, and keeping that. I think it is important to pause and go with that. So I'll move into my sweet and sour while you collect yourself. Thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing that with us, and processing what so many of us are definitely feeling right now with this weight. Because I do think I want to pull some of your words and talk about that second wave and things like that. So for me, I'm going to start with my sweet and then move into my sour. So my sweet is, hallelujah, we are done with schoolwork for this semester. And so that is a huge sweet for me. It's my kids both really enjoy school and they love school, but I'll just be really cards on the table. It's been, as you all know, a difficult juggle to really kind of keep all the things and all the pieces moving at the same time. And so I'm super super grateful that we made it through this piece. And who knows what it's going to look like in the fall, but that is definitely a celebration for us. And we got we made it. Definitely all good things. My sour, again, kind of pulls from that. And it also pulls from yours of that second wave. So today was our day to go turn in all of our school devices and to gather their belongings that they had in their classroom that they left so very long ago on March 7th. And it was a real, like, kind of a kick in the stomach of knowing that as we pulled through the car pickup line and rolled our window down and were greeted by our teachers in masks and handing us our paper bags with names stapled on it, that's not what the last day of school is supposed to be like. And so it was that realization of knowing, right, like our heads know what's going on, but our hearts really really wish and really miss that contact, that being able to say goodbye to your teacher. In some situations it was my child's teacher who was the one who that they got to say goodbye to, and in some it wasn't the classroom teacher that they had. And so it was that part where it's like they were supposed to be there, like signing each other's yearbooks and getting pictures with kids and stuff like that. And so that really settled in with me. And then as I moved through the day, I've started to just kind of hit that second wave of like, okay, so now what? So what's going to look like next? And we kept our eye on the prize and we did what we were supposed to do, and we hunkered down and we sheltered in place, and now what? And so that also hit me with this emotion of, holy moly, what, I don't have any more tricks in my bag to pull out to like get through this. Like, just like you said, the camps and all those things that we would typically do are not, those aren't going to be in our summer routine this year. And so what in the world am I going to do with these little people who need to be occupied, and I need to be working, and I need to, how do we build this and do this and fly this plane? And so, just really feeling your words of that second wave come over again. I thought I was past this. I thought I knew where we were going, and now all of a sudden, here we come.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, do you think this is part of why there's such a visceral reaction to the CDC guidelines? Because it clearly points out fall will not look the way we want it to. I think that's maybe why. I mean, I'm having a visceral reaction as you're explaining, like the drive-through, and it's like the teachers wearing the masks. Like, that's not how it's supposed to be. There's supposed to be hugs. And I know we've talked about that before. It's like, we're grieving a lot of things. And so I kind of think maybe that's why there's such a visceral reaction.
I wholeheartedly agree. Again, I think it's one of those where it's just that in your face reminder of, okay, this wasn't just a do this until this day, and then there's going to be some light switch turn on. And, I know we've said this repeatedly, like this is this is unknown terrain. We're not really sure. There's no expiration date on a pandemic. There's no, blueprint of what's going on, and definitely not making light of any of the decisions that anybody is wrestling with. But it is just this realization that, wow, okay, we really are, normal doesn't cease to exist anymore. Like, we're really trying to figure out what these things look like.
Yeah, there's a lot of fatigue. I feel like it's a second wave of emotion, fatigue. Okay, so we've done our sweet and sour, which was an emotional one today. And let's kind of transition into, we typically call this the tip section. It's going to be a little less about like tips, and we're going to be sharing ideas, and we're going to kind of unpack this, like, why are we all having such a visceral reaction to the CDC guidelines. And again, I want to reiterate that this is a series and that we're not going to be able to cover everything in one episode. Last episode was about teacher presence and like us starting to build that community, like what that could potentially look like in the fall. A lot to do with that online experience. And then what we're going to hopefully do next week is focus in on social emotional learning. I think one of the things that people are probably reacting to with the thought of spaces is that it might be very, very cold and impersonal. And so I think that if we can spend some time next week talking about the social emotional learning, I think that will be really, really helpful. And I think that'll be kind of an ongoing theme. Does that sound about right?
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things, jumping into that real quick before we build into it, I do think that we need to pause for a second and honor any type of change is difficult. Some of the most personal changes are, around your own personal hairstyle and dress, as well as like your house, right, or your surroundings, because they are so very reflective of your personality. And so I know a lot of times we talk about Pinterest perfect, or making your classroom really feel engaging, and sometimes it can be really easy to kind of pile onto that and make it sound like, oh, that's just a superficial thing. But I do think it's really important to kind of pause there and talk about why we have that reaction. And it is truly because we feel like it is a personal representation of who we are and what our motivating factors are for our students. And so I think that I just wanted to throw that in there, that nobody's making light of the efforts that we put into our classrooms and the efforts that we put into being there for our students. And so
I love that you said that. That is so important. And thank you for, hopefully I didn't say anything, and hopefully no one ever takes it that we're trivializing the care that teachers put into their space for their learners. Like that's an act of love, and that's something that we, I think, are grieving right now. And I think that's part of the visceral reaction to those CDC guidelines. Is I don't know how this looks compared to what I poured my heart and soul into over X amount of years. And so I definitely think that is really great of you to honor that. That's so important. Another thing that is causing, causing the visceral reaction, again, I think I said it earlier, but like the feeling of like, this is very cold and sterile. I never in my 20 plus years of education thought that I would be hearing about kids being put into pods or bubbles where they don't get outside of that, where people would be talking about walking through the halls and worrying about jet streams, as in like they're breathing, crossing paths with another child's breathing. I honestly, it just feels completely bizarre, completely insane. Like, I don't even know how to process that. And I know you and I've talked about this offline before, but it's really hard to imagine how we teach when our best practices often have to do with proximity, power proximity, cooperative learning. I think that's a big part of it. So what are you thinking about that?
I absolutely agree. I think it is so hard for us to wrap our minds around because of what we know fantastic and effective pedagogical practices to be. And we know how important, we've said it over and over again, it's not a device that teaches a kid, it's a person that teaches a kid. It's that relationship, it's that human being that comes into that. And so how do we, it is such a, it's really hard to wrap our minds around what that looks like in these very extreme of times that we're kind of potentially entering into. And I'm a hugger. Like, I want to hug people. I give people hugs as soon as I meet them. Like, and it's so hard to think about not having that opportunity to connect with people and move forward with that. And so I agree. I think that our very strong reaction is, well, that is not how I do it. That is not how I learn best. That is not how my kids learn best. And in the spirit of this audit, how do we unpack that and really start to look at breaking that apart? I think, one of the things that I know I was very guilty of when I was in the classroom, it's one of the things that I see happen a lot as a coach, and I try to push on this. And so it's sometimes it's that tough love, right? Of, realizing that the outcome is the first thing that I need to think about, not the package that's in it, right? And so again, going back to like the spaces that we were talking about, I know that I would often turn to Pinterest to just look up what the best environment, like the best decorated space for high school, and then you want to look at that and then try to emulate that, and that never works because I don't have the same personality that person did, and just because it worked in that situation doesn't mean that it's going to work in mine. And so I had to break that apart and then start to look at what were the feelings that I wanted my kids to have, and then how could I create that space around those feelings? What were the circumstances that I wanted them to be able to experience? Was it small groups? Was it, then how do I create those things? And so to me, that's one of the things that we've got to do is if we're talking about proximity and, having 6 feet apart for desk spaces, then that's almost like our design brief. Those are our constraints, right? And then how do we create environments that will still use those pedagogical practices, but within that format? And so, again, big fan of TPACK, big fan of those instructional models. And so how can we know the pedagogical practice that we want to put in, but how can we grab the technology that will then complement that pedagogical practice? So we've got the constraint of 6 feet spaces, but what technology can we use that will create that collaboration that we're missing with that constraint?
Yeah, and I kind of hear two themes emerging as we're kind of unpacking this. It's the space and the pedagogy, right? And so as you're talking, I'm thinking about, and it's been a while since I read this, but the third teacher, like the room is the space is the third teacher, and I'm sure I just completely failed at accurately describing that, but we do know that learning space is actually important, and not just aesthetically, and not even in just like making someone feel warm. So in our endless effort to see the sweet in our lemonade, there is potential that when we're told to remove everything that is considered non-essential in the learning space, that we clear that palette, we clear that room, and we have to be super intentional on what goes back into it. And I do wonder if this could potentially help some learners that are easily distracted. And maybe this is kind of a rejuvenation in learning spaces design. Like, this is a design challenge, and so here are the constraints. And again, maybe something good will come out of this. That when we do get to go back to as close to what normal was for us pre-COVID-19, maybe we come out better in our learning design space. Because I'm going to be honest, as a teacher, I was real into making it pretty. And I was not always thinking, is this essential for the proper learning environment? Was this essential for the outcomes that I wanted? It was often a lot of, is this pretty? That's something that I did. And I would think this would be a great opportunity to rethink that.
It's that Marie Kondo opportunity, right? Like, does this spark joy? Does this spark learning? Does this, is it necessary, or are we just recreating the butterfly project because I love the butterfly project? Like, how are we making sure that we're keeping that centered on there? And I think that that is so important. I love that you said that it's not necessarily just our preference that goes into it. We know from a learning science standpoint that our brain really does process better in an uncluttered environment. But that said, there's there's a huge difference between uncluttered and sterile, and I think that that's so important to remember. I also think that as you were talking, a couple of things were bouncing around in my brain, and one of them was how by nature there are several of us, myself included, that are very sentimental people, and so we hold on to all those things, right? Like I have all the notes that my students have given me. I still have them in a file. I have all the notes that my coworkers have ever given me. Like I keep all of those things, and we do the same in our classroom, and we end up with all of this all over the place. And instead of really being very intentional with it, one of my friends, she had built a house, and we were visiting. This was several years ago, and I walked in and I was like, oh my gosh, I love it. How do you? She has three girls that are high school down to my son's age. And I was like, how in the world do you keep all of this clean all of the time? And she was like, well, I don't have a lot of stuff. The stuff that I have is very important. And so I'm able to keep that, in the places, and everybody loves the style, but it all is very purposeful in there. And so I think this is such a great opportunity to do that. Like it is that forced opportunity to push through the clutter and really get to the heart of what is essential.
So kind of what I'm processing from our conversation is it's almost a good opportunity to declutter not just spaces, but also our practices as teachers, right? And so it's an opportunity to refocus on what is truly, truly important. And I think that's kind of maybe a good lead into our next episode, which to me, social emotional learning, and I know to you, is very, very important. And so I'm looking forward to having a conversation about that, because to me, when we're talking about all of this, it comes back to the whole child. So we have this really amazing opportunity to step back, and I think of the tenets of the whole child for ASCD, right? Like healthy, safe, engaged, supported, challenged. And so I feel like that might actually be, this isn't an endorsement of that, although I'm a fan of it, but it's not meant to be like a huge endorsement. But I'm just saying, I think that if we were to be, there never seems like this has never been a better time to focus on the healthy than right now. I'd like to think that we've always been focused on the healthy, but what a great opportunity to really focus on healthy. Healthy for many reasons, like social emotional, actually health wise, because of what's going on. And so I think there's a good opportunity. What do you think?
Absolutely. I think, again, going back to that audit of like, where are things, what works really, really well? What, in this situation, what has worked really well? What has not? And then what are those things that, where are those gaps? What can be improved? I've read everywhere, it seems, that people keep talking about, what is coming out over and over and over again is that role that social emotional health plays in school. And we've said that for so many years, but I think that seeing this, sometimes it takes these types of situations. This is a traumatic event, and we have to keep that in mind, that what we are experiencing, whether your family has experienced has experienced the illness or any of the things associated with it or not, what all we have gone through is a traumatic event. All of us have different vehicles that we're processing through this storm, but it is very much a traumatic event. And I think that what comes with that is change is necessary within a traumatic event. No one goes back to the event that caused that trauma, right? If we look at it from an abusive relationship, you don't want to keep going back to that same abusive situation over and over again. And so we have to learn and move forward from that. And so I think that that's what's so important right now, is really thinking through, what are we supposed to learn? What are we supposed to be better about? What are we supposed to do different? And focus on those things, instead of trying to replicate over and over again those situations.
Yeah, I mean that's I think the best tip we can give right now is do that audit and really be thinking about, you know, the outcomes. You can call it your why, like why are we doing this? And really an opportunity to rethink those things. Bree said that so well. I think that might be a good opportunity to like give people a chance to give us a shout out on social media. Like, what do we want to hear from them about?
I think first and foremost, what are your sweets? Like what have you changed? Where have you, moved forward with this? And when you're thinking about that, one of the things that I was also, keeping with our lemonade theme, I'm not an affiliate, I'm not a spokesperson, but there's a brand of lemonade out there that's called Simply Lemonade, right? And they the commercials talk about the very few ingredients that are in there. And I think that, talking about our learning spaces, talking about our objectives, sometimes really truly simplifying allows it to be so much more powerful, right? And I think that we talk about that word essential, and sometimes we have a very visceral reaction to it of like bare bones and it's stripped down and there's, it's almost this, there's nothing left. But instead, if we look at it from these very powerful and pure ingredients that go into something to make the perfect outcome. And I think that's, so what are those simple things that you've found that are working in this situation? I would love to hear that on social media. Like, I know that to me, that's what always ends up happening is like, it's the very simple, like, oh my gosh, that was all it took. Okay, I can do that and get rid of that. Sometimes I feel like my family has been watching, and my daughter's been watching The Worst Cooks in America, and I've been laughing because they add in all of these extra crazy ingredients because they just think that that's what you're supposed to do. And I feel like sometimes that's what we do. We just add in a whole bunch of junk because we heard that you were supposed to do it, and it really comes out terrible and it muddles the experience, and it's a very off-putting, right? But if instead we, choose avocados, lime, and some cilantro and some lemon juice, we make that perfect guacamole, we can do that with very few things instead of getting all kinds of crazy.
I think that's really good. I love that. It's simple, not sterile, right? Like that's the difference. Okay, so that's what we're looking for. So please share that with us. We want to learn from you, and not just tips necessarily about for teaching and learning, but parenting. We're open to those too because, like Bree said, it's like, wow, okay. So I thought we just kind of finished summer that had a little bit of work in it, and now it's like, oh, they're free. They have so much time. Okay, so I'd love to hear some of those ideas too.
All the tricks, whatever you've got, I have depleted my bag. So I need all of the parenting tips of what to do with these little creatures while we're in the day. So yeah, send them our way for sure.
All right. Well, thanks, friends. We can't wait to catch up with you on social media, and we'll be working on our next episode.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. #Lemonade Learning.